Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Bird's Nest Podcast. I'm Joe Donahue. Thank you so much for joining us. As I'm taping this, it's a little after 4:30, and just about 30 minutes ago or so, the Eagles had to get their roster down from the 90 players that got them through the preseason and through training camp to the initial 53-man roster. Now, we say initial because there are a number of other things. The Eagles will be able to establish their about 16-player practice squad starting tomorrow at noon as I'm recording this, and the Eagles will continue to monitor other transactions and how we may make a move to grab somebody who may have been released. So this is the initial 53-man roster, but certainly there are other moves that we could potentially have as the week goes on, as we make final preparations for this season opener in Brazil against the Green Bay Packers. So first off, we're going to start at quarterback. There shouldn't really be a ton of surprises here. Jalen Hurts, Tanner McKee, and Kenny Pickett. These are in alphabetical order by last name according to how they were released. That having been said, there has been some discussion regarding whether or not Kenny Pickett or Tanner McKee would be in the second position, and a lot of people are reinforcing this with the preseason performances that we saw both Kenny Pickett and Tanner McKee put out. I think it's important to bear in mind as we look at these that these guys were going against not the first team for the most part, and what that means is that there's going to be different degrees of performance that we're going to see in the preseason games. The Eagles' unofficial depth chart released by their communications department, for what it's worth, does have Tanner McKee listed as the third string quarterback and Kenny Pickett listed as the second string quarterback. Again, that's not official, but that does tend to give a good indication, as well as understanding from the beat reporters that are on site. We're probably going to see Kenny Pickett backing up Jalen Hurts more directly than we are going to be Tanner McKee. That's what happened all of last year. That would be what I would expect to occur. Moving on to running back, I don't think there are any surprises with the first two being Saquon Barkley and Kenny Gainwell. Both of those guys were relative locks. The Eagles went out to get Saquon Barkley during free agency, and Kenny Gainwell has been a solid performer for us for the last several years. It was really that third string running back that was at issue, and for this one, the Eagles went with Will Shipley. And I'm going to be very honest with you, we saw a lot of Will Shipley over the course of the preseason, and I was impressed. Will Shipley is the guy. It was the right decision, especially as you compare it with other guys like Tyrion Davis-Price or others like Lou Nichols, both of whom were released over the course of the day today. Will Shipley making the roster makes a lot of sense. So, well done, Will Shipley. Definitely earned the spot. Definitely earned the draft pick. Now we'll see how he pans out over the course of this regular season. Moving on to the wide receiver position at the roster. No surprise with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith being the number 1 and 2 on this. Britton Covey, Jahan Dotson, and Johnny Wilson also made the roster. Now, Jahan Dotson will be the number 3 wide receiver, the guy in the slot, with Britton Covey and Johnny Wilson backing him up, and Britton Covey most likely doing the punt return duty as he has done for the last number of years. I'm not really concerned about these. The Eagles have solid receivers in the 1 and 2 position, and again, Jahan Dotson was a top receiver for the Washington Commanders, so the fact that Howie was able to go out and snag him, definitely something to be said for that. So a couple of notable releases. There were definitely a lot of names that I don't even remember calling a ton of during the preseason streams that we had. A couple of names that stood out. Paris Campbell. The Eagles targeted Campbell in the offseason. I guess he did not make as much of an impact as the Eagles were hoping for. Joseph Ngata definitely did not have a great final game of the preseason, and you definitely expect the consistency out of those guys. And then Austin Watkins, whose name was called a few times during the preseason, did not make a ton of impact. and we saw him leave as well. Over on the offensive line, which was definitely an area of concern, especially as we look at the right guard position, we know that with Jason Kelce's retirement during the offseason, Cam Jurgens was basically selected to be the successor to Jason Kelce. We didn't see a ton of him during the preseason, but I've been hearing good things about him in that regard, so we will see Cam Jurgens at center. So the question has been more so in the right guard position. Now, midway through the preseason, Mekhi Becton stopped getting starts, and especially around the New England Patriots game where he didn't even suit up. The Eagles seem to have settled on Mekhi Becton as right guard. So then, based on the unofficial depth chart, we'll have starting at left tackle Jordan Mailata. Left guard will be Landon Dickerson. Cam Jurgens will be the starting center. So if that is the case, then the starting line will look like right tackle Lane Johnson, right guard Mekhi Becton, center Cam Jurgens, left guard Landon Dickerson, left tackle Jordan Mailata, with backups including Fred Johnson, Trevor Keegan, Darian Kinnard, and Tyler Steen. So again, that was the offense. No real surprises on there. Definitely a few fringe players that are certainly very happy to have made the team. Definitely some disappointments. Definitely some disappointments throughout the preseason. I mean, it made sense why the Eagles moved away from guys like Paris Campbell, Joseph Ngata, who is injured at this point, but he did not have a great last game. Moving on to the defensive side of the football, the Eagles have listed defensive tackle and edge rusher as positions for the defensive line. So there's really not a defensive end position formally, and that comes with the Vic Fangio defense that is being implemented right now. And this is going to be supplemented by the unofficial depth chart that the Eagles PR department has released. So starting at defensive tackle, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, and Milton Williams. Backing them up will be Thomas Booker, Moro Ojomo, and Marlon Tuipulotu. Now, again, those guys are starters. This is an unofficial list. At edge rusher, the starters have been listed as Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, and Patrick Johnson. But we could also see, and probably will also see, Brandon Graham mixed in there. He is officially listed as an edge rusher, but we'll probably see him making more of a presence on the defensive line than at edge rusher. Also factoring in will be Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt as backups for the edge rusher position. So the Eagles will have them probably cycling through, and they could also make contributions on special teams as Nolan Smith has done in the past. And the linebacker position, this was definitely an area of big concern for Eagles fans coming into this year, and the Eagles have 5 official linebackers listed. Making the initial 53-man roster in no particular order: Zach Baun, Nakobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Ben Van Sumeren, and Devin White. The Eagles are moving on from Oren Burks, as well as Brandon Smith, both of whom were released today. They, again, could be picked up in the practice squad as early as noon tomorrow. Other defensive backs that have been kept on the roster, we have Reed Blankenship, James Bradbury, Cooper DeJean, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Avonte Maddox, Tristan McCullum, Quinyon Mitchell, Eli Ricks, Kelly Ringo, Isaiah Rodgers, and Darius Slay. Now, a lot of people are concerned about James Bradbury and his presence in the defensive backfield. According to the unofficial depth chart that the Eagles PR department put out, Bradbury is listed as a safety. He would be backing up C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship. And I don't think that there's a ton of surprise if you consider the fact that he is a backup. If the Eagles had made a decision where he was going to be starting, then yeah, we have a problem. But I think keeping him on as a backup, I think, makes a little bit more sense than what they were trying to do last year with James Bradbury playing a large majority of the snaps, and it didn't really work out for him in that regard. But I think he'll be a better suited backup this year behind somebody like C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship. As for where these guys fall, we have Darius Slay looking as though he's going to be the starting corner alongside either Isaiah Rodgers or Kelly Ringo. Again, this is based off of the unofficial depth chart that the Eagles released. Nickel corner would be Avonte Maddox starting there with Cooper DeJean backing him up. And again, going back to the linebacker position, the only real indicator that we have is Ben Van Sumeren is going to be backing up whomever in that list. So the Eagles, it doesn't look like, have settled based on the unofficial depth chart on who is going to be starting in those positions. But it does look like either Devin White or Nakobe Dean or Zach Baun or Jeremiah Trotter Jr. would be starting. Now, if I were a betting man, I would say Nakobe Dean would be starting at linebacker, and then we'd probably also see Zach Baun over Jeremiah Trotter Jr., just given the rookie status, but we'll see how that pans out. No surprises in the special teams department. Jake Elliott as kicker, long snapper as Rick Lovato, and punter as Braden Mann. So that is the initial 53-man roster. There were a couple of changes as well this year to the procedure. So the Eagles did carry Sidney Brown on the physically unable to perform list. So safety Sidney Brown will miss the first few weeks of the season while he's on that list. In addition, there were a couple of changes that were made to the injured reserve process. So on the injured reserve process, the Eagles were allowed to carry 2 individuals on injured reserve who are designated for return. Now, those 2 individuals will count against the 8 players that the Eagles are allowed to bring back from injured reserve throughout the regular season. The 2 players that they carried on injured reserve were Albert Okwuegbunam and Ainias Smith. So just a couple of immediate insights. I think that the offensive line still has some question marks around it. Looking forward to seeing especially how Mekhi Becton blends in with the other 4 refrigerators that are on the offensive line. But I think that he's going to do just fine. Definitely still concerned about linebacker. We are still a little bit thin there. And I'm looking forward to seeing how our defensive backs perform over the course of the season. But here we have it, the initial 53-man roster. It's still subject to change. Rosters are always fluid. We know Howie Roseman always looking to make a move on the roster to improve the team. So definitely let me know what your thoughts are about this roster. Any areas that you think that we improved? Any areas that you have concerns about? Let me know. And thank you so much to everybody for tuning in to the Bird's Nest Podcast. You can support the Bird's Nest Podcast by liking and subscribing to Bird's Nest Media right here on YouTube, as well as by sharing to your social media pages. You can also find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, and the Odyssey app. Please visit birdsnestmedia.com for additional Eagles coverage, and if you feel so inclined to support us a different way, you can find the link to our Patreon either in the description below or at birdsnestmedia.com. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's go Eagles!